I'm Victoria Stevens, and welcome to this podcast, Stock Exchanges. In my day job, working as a fund manager at Lion Trust, investing on behalf of our clients in UK stock market listed companies, I'm fortunate enough to cross paths with some of Britain's most inspiring entrepreneurs. It's a huge privilege to sit across the table from the people who've put their heart and soul into growing and running companies. And in this series, I want to share that privilege with you, our listeners. My guest today is Morgan Tillbrook, the founder and former chief executive of Alpha Group. Alpha was conceived as a provider of foreign exchange risk management services to medium-sized businesses, those big enough to need to manage the risk of transacting in multiple different currencies, but small enough for it to make very little economic sense to employ a team of people in-house to help manage that risk. The pitch was to provide a consultancy-led service, a one-stop shop hand-holding the customer in planning and executing a comprehensive FX risk management strategy. Now, Alpha has experienced rapid growth in the 15 years since Morgan founded the business, going from a single office in Berkshire to a FTSE 250 listed business, employing almost 500 people across 10 offices around the globe. It's significantly diversified its offering into technology-enabled alternative banking services like global bank accounts, multi-bank connectivity and payments. And the business's success has been in large part down to Morgan's unparalleled ambition and entrepreneurial drive. At its heart, his approach has been to create and fiercely protect a high-performance, customer-centric culture, one which deeply values and rewards those all-important people working for the business. Now, we're going to get into all of that during the podcast, which comes at a really interesting juncture for Alpha, with Morgan having stepped down from the business he created just at the beginning of this year. Morgan, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
So to start with, I think I'd like to take you back to life before Alpha. I'd like to revisit the early years of your career for a moment and understand your background a little bit better. As I understand it, this venture was not your first entrepreneurial venture. So it'd be great to hear a little bit about those early days.
No, it wasn't my first, but it's definitely my most successful, and the one that I remember more of, being a big chunk of my life, 16 years. And but looking back, I certainly didn't ever expect to achieve the level of success that we did as a business. I say we because it certainly wasn't just me. It was an incredible team that I surrounded myself with, and I think that's something that I seem to be very good at, picking people and delegating to them. And if I was to look back, when I was much younger at school, I certainly wouldn't have ever thought I'd have built a FTSE 250. I went to a state school, had a pretty tough time at school, being dyslexic. So back then, I'm 42 now. So back then there wasn't really much support for dyslexic people. There wasn't spell check or laptops or extra time. It was kind of in the deep end and figure it out for yourself. So yeah, it was a bit of a tough start. But I think at school actually was probably what made me, if I'm honest. I think it was that adversity of being dyslexic and when you are dyslexic, you often find that you're kind of really good at a few things and terrible at everything else. And actually that's where I first started to delegate, because I had a Saturday job and I realised I could pay people to do the coursework in the subjects that I disliked, and I could focus on the subjects that I did like, which was maths and arts. So pretty much fraudulently did all my other subjects at school, and but it taught me to delegate from a young age, which I took on into business. And but after school, which I only did my GCSEs. I didn't finish my A-levels. I started them, but I didn't finish them. After school, I kind of turned my hand to a few things, really. I tried everything from dealing in cars to mobile phones to, I was an array of things that I tried. And but my first sort of main venture before Alpha would have been the poker business, which is a business called the Poker Project, which was, going back a long time now. So we launched a poker project similar time to Facebook. And we realised there was an opportunity to kind of mix online poker with a kind of a social element. So we kind of built a social online poker league that grew really well, and of course collected a lot of data and a lot of customers, up and down the country. And we had these great competitions where people could be sent off to the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas or European Poker Tours in Europe, and it was a real fun time. I remember it fondly. A lot of my friends ended up working for me because it was this fun poker business, and we were in our early 20s. And but eventually, we sold that business to Sky. At the time, it was called B Sky B was the name back then. And 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 that was my first, I would say, successful venture before Alpha, and I learned a lot from that business, and then took a few years out and started Alpha.
So having had that taste of entrepreneurialism early on, what prompted the decision to start Alpha? I mean, I know you haven't mentioned there any kind of background or prior experience in financial services, and the business was clearly founded in 2009. I think. So
yes.
Right in the grip of the financial crisis, a brave time to launch it. So tell us a little bit about how you came to decide to launch the business in the first place.
Well, I had zero experience in financial services and no experience in foreign exchange either. But I actually came across a couple of guys talking about foreign exchange, sitting on a chairlift, skiing in a ski resort in France, and went away, did some research, looked into the industry, and quite quickly could see there was an opportunity there. And I felt that when looking at the competition, that although the banks had antiquated systems, a lot of the incumbent foreign exchange brokers also had old systems. They weren't cloud-based yet. They were on SQL servers and so forth. And also a lot of them weren't really focused. They were kind of servicing all types of customers: retail, small corporates, large corporates, doing payments, doing hedging, even doing cash travel money back then. Before going back now, aren't we? We used to take money in cash on holiday, and there wasn't really a focus. And I could see there was an opportunity there, and I could also see the tailwinds. I think technology was starting to gather pace, and I felt there was going to be continuous tailwinds to take share from the banks. And so I did some research. I wrote to a few of the competitors to ask for some support, or if they wanted to invest in my startup. Most of them ignored me. One didn't. One came back to me, a lovely chap called Stuart Blake, who ran a business at the time called Corporate FX, and he took a share in the business and kind of acted as a mentor, because I had no experience in the industry. I felt I needed at least somebody that I could talk to, and Stuart was that sounding board and that mentor to me in the early days. There wasn't long before Alpha overtook their business, but we still have a relationship.
Oh, good to hear. And in terms of those early days and how you created the foundations of the culture that, as I mentioned in the introduction, have been so important to the business's success, how do you feel that you went about defining what that culture really meant for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a long time to go back, but what I would say was I was quite fortunate that when I launched Alpha, that I had some financial backing from my previous venture, and so I wasn't really in the need or the requirement to draw a big salary to live. So I actually paid myself a very low salary for a long time. So I think that gave me the freedom to focus on doing things the right way and building those foundations, as opposed to worrying about making money today, to reward myself, so to speak. So I paid myself very little for the first 6-7 years, and just focused on the foundations, doing things the right way, avoiding the paths of least resistance, where you take the shortcuts, to ensure that foundation was in place. And of those foundations, the one that probably stands out as the most important is putting customers, at the front, and treating them in ways which they want to return and recommend you to other customers. And that often comes, especially in a business like Alpha, comes down to providing, impartial advice, which is right for the customer, not necessarily right for the revenues of the company. So it's that long-term approach and ingraining that. And when you build that into your sales culture, which, trust me, is very rare, when new salespeople come to the business, they look to the left, they look to the right, and they see people doing it the right way and earning, good money from doing it the right way. That becomes infectious and it becomes scalable. And then you just have to protect it like it's everything, because it is, and your reputation is everything, but ultimately your culture and how you sell and you represent the business is at the forefront. And we spent a lot of time, ingraining that into the business, and unfortunately sometimes having to let people go, people that were great at generating revenue, but they couldn't help themselves. They see additional revenue on the table and they would want to take it at the expense of, the future. So we were very, very resolute in our standards and our principles around that. And I think that's probably the secret sauce to the business.
Yeah, and we'll definitely come back and pick up on some of those threads in some questions later on, if that's okay. One thing that you sort of touched upon there a little bit, and we've talked about before, is just the importance of sourcing great talent, and how you felt that is one area where, you look back with pride on your track record. Tell us a little bit about what you look for in the people that joined the business.
Yeah, I think being a service-led organisation, talent is a huge part of your value, and we've got a phenomenal team at Alpha, and I enjoyed as part. I think I enjoyed interviewing and selecting talent more than anything, and what was it we really looked for? I mean, I often looked for people that were very. We looked for humility. That was a real strong trait that we'd look for, but often wouldn't look for people that well polished. We almost had not a distrust. That's a strong word, but I looked for people that were more not more strong. It's the wrong word, but I looked for people who were authentic in themselves, and people that I could see would be able to build relationships with the team. And I've seen it many times in business where you can have people that are too well polished, and they struggle to coach other people or empower other people because they have an aura about them, which is almost like they know everything and they're super smart and super bright, and then people are frightened of asking questions that maybe appear stupid, for example. A good example actually would be, this is a really good example, it would be sales directors. More often than not, the best salesperson gets promoted as a sales director, and nearly is always a disaster. And the reason it's a disaster is because the best salesperson often becomes the best salesperson because they're naturally good at being a salesperson. And because they're naturally good at it, they didn't have to work hard at becoming good at sales. And therefore, when they become a sales director, they haven't got the empathy with people that need coaching. Because for them, it's like, well, why can't you do it? It's easy. Do you know what I mean? Because it was natural for them. And the best sales directors are actually people that found it really difficult in the first 2-3 years, and they had to coach themselves, learn, develop. And then when they become that sales director, they have the empathy for people that are struggling, and they have the skills to know how to coach people because it wasn't just natural for them. I think that's a really good example of a sales director, but actually it covers across an entire business and all roles. And if you hire people that are that really polished individual that can do everything really easily, then naturally they're not always the best coach. So I look for people that have, I wouldn't say struggled, but I look for authentic people that aren't necessarily super articulate, but that you can just tell there's a warmth about them and a level of compassion and empathy that they'll make good coaches. Because ultimately,
they're a great cultural fit, right?
Yeah, your best leaders need to be great coaches, because ultimately they'll be succeeded at some day, at some point in the future. But there's a lot of good leaders out there that aren't necessarily good coaches, but they're really good at doing the job. So I think I was always looking for people like that, and a culture like that as well, because people grow and develop a lot faster in a speak up culture where people aren't frightened of asking questions, even if they may appear stupid at that point in time or naive, for example.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice, particularly with a business that lives and dies by that culture. So we've obviously covered some of the early years at Alpha and the defining of that all-important culture. But I guess I'd like to explore a little bit what happened as you started to scale the business, to diversify away from solely that original provision of FX risk management services, because over the business's more recent history, as I mentioned in my introduction, you've moved into alternative banking, you've focused on alternative investment management clients, you've grown that client base, you've expanded internationally using the key talent from the UK to seed those international offices and preserve that culture. You've been very busy, I suppose. And I guess if I took a step back from that, I think one thing that seems to be true from the outside, at least, is that the thing that appears to unite this is this real hunger, this entrepreneurial hunger to capitalize on opportunity and a willingness to take calculated risks to grow the business for the long term. And I guess I wanted to ask you if that chimes with you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, when I look back at Alpha's journey and some of the diversification, our first international move was to Canada. And Canada had a really good start for the first couple of years, but then it flatlined and I had a really difficult time. And actually, the core reason for Canada not having a great start was that we hired externally to fill that role. And all the other offices around the world that we launched were seeded from the UK talent base and were successes and had no issues because the culture was ingrained and they knew how to do it the Alpha way. And so yeah, we didn't always get it right. We did learn that when you're going to go overseas, if you can, always try and export your talent because they just know your business inside out and it's a known quantity. And so we took risks of sometimes hiring externally and it didn't work for us. But generally speaking, your point about diversification, I think most good entrepreneurs have a high level of paranoia I certainly have a high level of paranoia, and therefore diversifying is a way to reduce your exposure to revenues falling for whatever reason it may be, and also it diversifies away from risks of technology, and all sorts of other risks. So it was kind of hardwired to diversify. And the first move was to go from corporate then into institutionals, and then it was to go global. And then we've launched some other products like Cobase, our technology offering. But the key is kind of knowing where to play and how to win, because you can place too many bets. And if you actually place them in the wrong places and you don't know how to pull them together and make them win, it's not going to work. So when we did make those place those bets or make those investments, we always did it with a real level of discipline, and ask ourselves these questions like, does it actually make the overall business stronger? Or actually are we going to create more distraction for ourselves in a tough climate? I think that should be the test. Like if you make an investment, but actually in a tough environment, it's going to make you stronger, then that's great. But actually, if it's going to spread your management bandwidth and it's going to start to pull right to left, then it's not necessarily a good idea. So we were very disciplined in making investments that we felt strengthened the business and were the right ones and ones we were sure we had a strategy to win in. I think that's critical. And we also very much believe in decentralization. So I think another thing, if you're going to make investments, you're going to diversify. It's important to ensure that you empower the people to run those businesses and you decentralize them so they can be successful and not be held back. As a business gets bigger, you have more, it very quickly becomes more bureaucratic. So that independence and flexibility is really important.
And we'll definitely come back and pick up a little bit on that incentivization piece in a little while. So you pulled on a bit of a thread there that I wanted to pick up anyway, which was the role of technology within the business. I think it's very difficult to have any conversation with any business nowadays and ignore this technological wave that's sweeping the world with the rise of AI. And I've heard you describe Alpha before as half human, half digital, which is a really interesting way of thinking about that human augmented by technology type approach, achieving the best outcomes. So just wanted to understand how you apply, the lessons of technological advancement to the opportunities and threats of the AI revolution for Alpha's business.
Yeah, I mean, from the early days, we were quite lucky because we set up in 2009 and we adopted the cloud from day one, so we didn't have any legacy, which was brilliant. But yeah, trying to keep up with it and evolve is key. There are at this point in time, the banks still have the lion's share of our market, and they have very antiquated systems to say the least. And of course, there's old antiquated systems such as CHAPS and BACS and the payment networks around the world as well. But we are seeing them start to improve and new versions being launched. So staying in front of it is critical. So that's why we bought Cobase. It's a business that connects all of your banking infrastructure into one place, so our clients can conceal their balances in one place and instigate payments, from our platform, as opposed to them to log into each bank. So we're investing by buying technology. We're also, building our own technology, and just trying to stay abreast with what's changing and what's happening. And but it takes time for these things to evolve. And you touched on AI there, and I think AI is an opportunity. A good example was when I was doing the final budgeting process at Alpha last year. Our HR team was looking to add some heads, and they decided they didn't need to add any heads. Because actually in reality, they could use ChatGPT to write contracts or amend contracts. So there are some efficiencies that come with AI, but I think it also creates other roles as well. And I look at AI a bit like when power tools came out for carpenters. Everybody, you would think, well, what's that going to do? The carpenters are going to be out of work, but you try and find a carpenter now, right? It's still really difficult to find a good carpenter. So power tools didn't completely disrupt that industry. It just meant that they could be more productive and more efficient. So I think there'll be new opportunities in other areas, and of course there'll be job losses in others. But I think the key is staying abreast and reading a lot, which I'm getting to do now that I'm retired. So I've read a fair few books on AI, and I'm not convinced it's quite as intelligent as in the name. We all know how a lot of us know how it works. It predicts what the next words are going to be, or in its process of how it operates. And there's a lot, there's a lot still out there to see how far it can go and what it can actually do. But I think the key is reading, staying abreast, investing, and also not trying. I don't think you have to be on the beating edge. When you're investing, investing can mean partnering with companies that are on the bleeding edge and spending lots of investors' money trying to invent new technologies. And so I think the key is looking for partners as well. You can leverage.
I love that carpenter analogy. I suppose one thing that I was thinking of with the question was, if we take it to a sort of higher level, just conceptually, about a business that, at least for a significant chunk of the company's revenues, are derived first and foremost from the provision of a consultancy-led offering.
Okay. Yeah.
And the fact that a kind of those people-based services, if you like, certainly there's been a lot of talk about how they theoretically could be disrupted. So just very interested to understand how you think about the role of the human, or human-to-human interaction, I should probably say, in the provision of such services.
Yeah, in the provision of our services, I'm not too worried. We've always focused on the larger clients with more complex issues, as opposed to, say, if you're a customer, at Wise. It's very technology-led, and the challenges those humans that use Wise face are pretty simple. As where if you're a global institution or investment vehicle and you've got assets all around the world and there's really complex compliance with that, it requires intelligent humans to support that technology, that service. So we've always we've based ourselves in services that require intelligent human interaction but enabled by technology, as opposed to, actually, if you look at a Wise, for example, not being derogatory, they're a great business. They're less, technology is actually first. It's almost like they're technology first, and then it's enabled by people. As opposed to, have I got the right way around? I might have got the right way around. But you know the point I'm making. It's technology first, with people to support it. As where Alpha, it's people first and technology that supports it. And I think that's a good place to be in this world, because it's gives you more pricing power, more value out of your customers. And but that being said, there will be some efficiencies, there will be some evolvements because of AI, and we'll look to. Well, I say we. I'm not there anymore. They will, I'm sure, because they're a fantastic team. Will look to adjust the business where they can in regard to that.
I'm conscious I could personally spend the entire podcast talking about that topic, and I need to be disciplined and force myself to move on. But thanks so much for the thoughts there. I wanted to move us now to talking about another, what I see as being a really key moment in the Alpha journey, which is the decision to list the business on the AIM market in 2017. And for our listeners' purposes, I just wanted to point out that you spent the first a number of years on the AIM market and spoke very fondly of how important the role that junior market had played for the business had been, before you then moved to the main market in 2024, and then subsequently, as we mentioned previously, joined the FTSE 250 index. But taking a step back to that first decision to list the business, what motivated that decision, and what do you think it meant for the business?
Well, firstly, we wanted to raise some capital because we wanted to grow the business, and we were moving up the food chain with larger and large customers, and therefore those customers needed bigger credit lines. So it was for capital. It was also because I wanted to create a platform to motivate the team. With share schemes and rewards, and being a public company, share schemes, are more tangible than in a private company. Just that's a fact, and therefore that was one of the key reasons. And we looked at. There's plenty of private equity companies that are courting Alpha, and there's some really good private equity companies out there, but there's also a lot of bad ones. And I didn't feel like I wanted to roll the dice and take the risk, having partners that would have a level of control that wouldn't necessarily have the same alignment, in the long term, goals that I would have. I think naturally private equity buy the business and they're thinking, right, in 5-7 years you want to sell it, and they're thinking about the sale, and it's all about a destination and monetization. Well, that doesn't really align with building a long-term business and a culture-centric one. So I didn't think that PE was the right route for us. And actually, before we went public, we did reach out to the best part of 10, 15 CEOs and CFOs of other listed businesses. Ones that had gone well, and ones that hadn't gone well. And did a lot of research and met those customers, and I wanted to learn why some had a good journey and some didn't. So we didn't go in with anything but wide open eyes. So after that, not only did we pick up a few customers while doing that due diligence, it cemented that it was the right thing to do. And I think I took away some principles on how to manage a public company from that, and obviously worked out quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like the right moment now to pick up on that mentality of equity ownership, which has pervaded the business's culture since the very beginning. And you've talked eloquently there about the long-term time horizon that it confers upon not just you, but the people who are below you in the business, or were below you in the business as well, as shareholders as well. So I guess I'd like to ask you an open question, really, about how you think about the power of equity incentivization, not just at the very high levels, but right through the organisation.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic tool and something that's played a huge part in Alpha's success. I think one thing we did that was quite unique to a lot of businesses is that we had a lot of share schemes. So Alpha didn't have one PLC scheme that then issued out to people if the business performed. We actually had dozens in the end of share schemes that were individually split up across the different divisions and different departments. So therefore we could really align the remuneration to the team's performance as opposed to the business performance. Because the last thing I wanted was corporate, hedging going really, really well, funds not going well, but the funds get to vest their shares and dilute people like myself and you, Victoria, when they haven't actually delivered. So we decentralised our share schemes to create that level of accountability, and also it's more motivating. I think if you're an individual and you start the year and you think, well, what I've got to do is do X, Y, and Z, which we as a team are in control of, and we can achieve X shares, you're more likely to put the discretionary energy in and go further. So that was quite unique in doing that. And it took a bit of convincing of my board that we should do that. And actually, I got the idea from Warren Buffett, because a lot of the businesses that he's invested in, he has this approach. He has this approach as well, where he believes that remuneration should be linked to as much as possible to the individual that's contributing. It was a fantastic tool. Even more so when you target it like we did, and to be honest, it was probably the highlights of my career at Alpha. Each year, seeing the shares vest, it was fantastic. And some of the messages I would get, and cards or pictures of people's first house they bought and they sent to me on WhatsApp was magical. And yeah, with definitely my fondest memories, and it's something that Alpha is still support, and Clive is a big believer in as well. So long may it continue, at Alpha. But I'm a big supporter of share schemes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really tangible when you talk about that personal pride that you had at watching the shared success in the business's success, if you like. So great to hear that. I want to pick up on two recent decisions, one of which is linked to that equity incentivization piece. But first, I guess it's relatively unusual for us to see a founder manager step down from the CEO's role, but also fully step away from the business. I think it's probably more normal, if we want to call it that, for those characters to remain on the board in some capacity, involved in the business in some capacity. So I'm really interested in getting some insight into that highly personal decision that you made to not just step down from the day-to-day running of the business, but also almost formally handing over those reins in entirety.
I think it goes back to my point I made earlier about saying that I was always a good delegator from an early age, being dyslexic. Trying to find people that could do things that I was pretty bad at, and I think, to be honest, empowering people is critical, and when you delegate to people, empowering them is the next important step. And had I stayed on the board, I don't think it had been very empowering for Clive to have me sat there, and people would naturally look to me because I've been here for 16 years. So I think that yes, half the battle is delegating to the right people, and the other half of the battle was then empowering them. And I knew that Clive was a very capable person. I knew that he was better suited to run the business than I am today, with the nature of its size and complexity and where it is in the journey. I just didn't think it was the right thing to do, and I was confident in the decision. And I think I committed to retaining a large percentage of my shares for the next 3 years when I did that, to show the market, look, this is genuine. I rate this individual. I rate the team that are behind him, and therefore I respect him, and I want to empower him to take the business to the next level. And that's what it came down to. And I think the other reason why I did the lock-in for 3 years, which I've done a number of times, I think I did 3 years, 3 lock-ins, was it also sends a really clear message to my team. Like when I was leaving the business, I didn't want other shareholders who had shares issued over the years through the share schemes to panic and go, I better sell now because it's the top, the founder's leaving. So by me saying, well, no, guys, I'm going to hold my shares was a really strong message to my team. So when I said to my team, look, Clive can do this. He's going to grow this business. Don't sell the shares because I'm not selling my shares, right? I'm going to keep the majority of them. I think those messages are really important. And I think it also strikes that long-term view.
And it's always a difficult juncture for the business when the founder does step away, but it's quite hard to think of someone who's better qualified than Clive to take the reins at this stage.
For sure. I mean, he was my mentor. Let's not forget, when I went to Clive and asked him to be the chairman, it was 2016. So it was, 9 years before I stepped down. So he's been with me from, 32 to 42. So, there's a lot of maturity happens from the age of 32 to 42 in business. And a lot of that would have been down to Clive and he was at a fantastic sounding board. And he learned a lot about the business because of his very close relationship to me and to the company over those years. And let's not forget Clive, when Clive was started to be chairman of the business, we were 40 people just doing corporate FX. So he lived all of the diversification. He lived all of the investments. So he knows the business inside out. And, but yeah, he's one of those individuals that's just better suited because he has that type of brain that can handle all of the regulation and the public markets and all the investments and all the reporting. And as a business gets bigger and more complex, it requires a different type of person. I'm more of an instinctive individual that trusts my intuition. I'm creative, and I'm certainly not comparing myself to Steve Jobs in any stretch of the imagination, but Steve Jobs, he was the creative at Apple, and everyone thinks of Apple and they think of Steve Jobs. But if you actually look at the market value, the market capitalization of Apple when Jobs stepped down and unfortunately passed away, to what the new CEO has done is phenomenal. And so Apple didn't go backwards because of Tim Cook. Tim Cook just knew how to take those innovations forward better. So, I think Clive's my Tim Cook, so to speak.
Love that. And if that was an unusual decision, I think the second of those two decisions that I mentioned we were going to talk about is certainly, to my knowledge, without precedent in the London market, which is your decision to bequeath a significant proportion of your own personal shareholding to the senior leaders of the business that you left behind. So for the benefit of our listeners, you announced earlier in the year that you pledged shares worth around £28 million to a number of the senior leadership team to thank them for their historic performance, but also critically to incentivise them for future performance. So tell us a little bit about that unprecedented decision.
Yeah, it was a reasonable list of people, and it wasn't just a handful. Look, I think, to be honest, I felt that the team had stood behind me for a long time. They'd given me everything, and a lot of the success is down to them. And I wanted to reward them. And I also wanted to ensure that Alpha would go through that transition from a founder-led business to being led by Clive with as much chance of success as possible. And as Warren Buffett always says, show me the remuneration, I'll show you the behaviour. So I thought, that will help. And ultimately, I was still a big shareholder in the business. So, there's a little bit of selfishness in there too. It's not all just a nice gift, so to speak. But ultimately, it was just something that felt right. It just felt right, and I wanted to do it, and I enjoyed doing it, and I'm sure the team are doubling down and working super hard because of it. But again, I applied my principles with that share scheme. I split it up, so it was across different divisions of the company based on their performance. So it's that decentralised reward kind of scheme again. So there's lots of people there that are incentivised and in control of delivering on those schemes for themselves, and I think that will generate a lot of momentum for the business and support Clive as well in getting things or keeping things moving at a high pace.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're obviously now in the position where you've got a lot more leisure time than you have had for a very long time. So I thought it'd be interesting really to delve a little bit into life after Alpha and what that looks like. And one thing which I can't let you leave without talking about is your passion for racing cars. So you've been a registered British GT championship driver for a number of years. So I'm guessing that you're spending quite a lot of time indulging in that particular passion. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I am. Well, first on your first question about just stepping down, the change. I feel it's a bit like an elastic band. I think when you're in the middle of it, you don't realise how stretched you are. And for the last 3-4 months, I've kind of slowly watched my elastic band come closer and closer together because you just don't realise how stretched you are. So I've been really enjoying spending time with the kids and my wife and my family, and doing a lot of walking, a lot of reading. Actually, after this podcast, I'm going to go and have lunch with some of the Alpha team. So looking forward to connect with them. And of course, the markets have kept me busy, Mr. Trump, which is interesting. Normally I'm so busy with Alpha, I haven't got time to even think about, what I do in those scenarios. So it's been quite nice to be able to read the news and just follow that. But I do miss it. It's been 3-4 months, but I know it's the right decision. I know that the business is better placed with Clive going forward. But on to the other question about the racing. Yes, so that's my passion. That's what gets me out of bed every day now. It's fair to say. I've got a race this weekend. I've got the Silverstone 500, which is one of the British GT rounds, which is quite a big race to try and win. It gets a lot of international drivers that come on an invite basis to this race. So hoping to have a successful weekend.
And a few very quick questions about that. So for those like me who are not initiated into the wild world of racing, what's the difference between Formula One and GC?
So Formula One racing is obviously the pinnacle, and that's single-seater racing. And GT racing are more akin to your kind of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Porsches. So they're still single-seater, but it's a Ferrari or Porsche. So there's a spare seat next to you there's no seat next to you, just electronics and lots of fire extinguishers that sit next to you.
It's a car you can drive on the road.
No, you definitely can't drive it on the road. No, but they take they take a Ferrari that'd be on the road, and they pretty much take 80% of the parts off it and they replace them with race parts. So it looks a bit like a Ferrari on the road, but with bigger wings and slick tyres and a lot more aerodynamics and so forth. So they're based on road cars from a look perspective, and it's endurance racing. So we do races which are 24 hours. So you do Le Mans you do Daytona or Spa, which are 24-hour races
in teams where you're
correct. You typically have 3
drivers.
So GT racing is more endurance, as where Formula One is typically a 2-hour race.
Yeah, understood. And how did you get into it in the first place? Did you do it as a kid? Did you race go-karts?
Yeah, I did. I did a bit of racing when I was younger, a bit of go-karting, and but to be honest, it was after I IPO'd the business in 2017. I felt like I needed something else in my life, not just work. And I thought, golf, didn't really float my boat. So I thought I'd go back into racing, and I just loved it, and I just felt that on a race weekend I could think about anything else. That I was fully immersed in the racing for that week, for the weekend, and I just love the team element. There's a sizable team. There's a lot of data involved, a lot of variables. So it's a bit like business actually. Racing is very similar to business, and it relies on a team all coming together and things working to get a result. So I enjoy that kind of not knowing what's going to happen at the start of the weekend and how things can twist and turn through a weekend, and then you get to end a weekend and it's either disappointment or elation. And unfortunately for motorsport, it's 90% disappointment and 10% elation.
But it's worth it for that 10% elation.
It is. It's like when you play golf, and you're not sure if you play golf, but you strike the ball really well and it just lands on the green. And you're like, wow, if I could just do that again and again, I could be a pro golfer. But you can't.
Turns out the consistency is the problem.
Same with racing.
Okay.
Trying to be consistent when you've got a car, an inch behind you, 180 miles an hour is difficult. So it takes a lot of focus and preparation. But I enjoy the challenge, and it gives me something to train for and stay fit for, and enjoy that competitive element like I did in business.
And I'm guessing that it's one of those hobbies where you because it is so all-consuming while you're doing it, because you can't lose focus, as you say, driving 180 miles an hour when you've got a car right on your tail. It's probably one of those hobbies where it actually gives you a bit more space for your mind to relax. Ironically, I find that about skiing, because if I go and I lie on a beach, then all I find is that my brain is whirring all the time thinking about work. Whereas if I go and I ski hard, then obviously, because I can't concentrate on something different, then it's freeing in a sense. It's total relaxation for a really strange reason.
No, it is. I wouldn't say it's relaxing. I mean, my heartbeat sits 180 for about 2 hours. But afterwards, you've had such an adrenaline dump and cortisone dump that you're just so drained for 2-3 days. You get the blues. Honestly, I get the blues for a couple of days, just because you're just absolutely zapped. But yeah, no, it certainly tunes you out and it enables you to focus. And there's few things that do that, and it does it for me.
Well, we'll definitely keep an eye on the scores there in the GT. So my penultimate question, I should say, is whether or not we're likely to see you back in the London stock market in the future. I have heard rumours of being involved with a startup, an interesting startup where you're backing one of your own ex-employees in founding and scaling a business. Is it an experience that you'd like to repeat?
I certainly wouldn't be a CEO again. I feel like it's 15 years of I did 8 years in the public markets. That's quite a stint, It's not bad. Ronnie from Volution was telling me how he's done, I think, 15 now, and he's a proper veteran now in that regard. But it's taken its toll. I enjoyed every minute of it. But yeah, no, I'd love to support a new venture on the stock market. Again, I'm a big believer in the stock market. I think it's a great place to grow businesses and reward people and investors. And so yeah, I'd watch this space. There's a good chance that you'll see me involved in something, but not as a CEO.
Yeah, understood. We'll watch that dangling carrot with excitement. And my final question to you, which is one that I'm asking all my podcast guests, is obviously I'm talking to a lot of people who've reached what many would consider to be a real pinnacle in their careers. But I always wonder what they would say, what you would say, if I gave you the opportunity to exchange places with any other person in any other career just for a day. Who would that be and why?
I think it would be Toto Wolff at Mercedes F1. I think I choose Mercedes F1 just because I like Toto Wolff. I quite like his demeanour. He's quite humble, and I think he's just got something about his character that I find quite magnetic. But yeah, I'd love to spend a bit of time as the team principal of Mercedes F1. That'd be an amazing experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Morgan. So many insights and learnings from that journey at Alpha, and we do very much hope that you'll be back with your new venture at some point in the future. And for our listeners, please do subscribe to the podcast via Spotify, Apple, or your usual podcast provider. And as always, please remember that nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or a solicitation to purchase securities in any company or investment product mentioned. We'll see you next time.